Until last year, the man President Obama relied on most to navigate the tensions in Asia was Kurt Campbell. Few people understand the competing claims, the risks and potential rewards in Asia better than him. He was the US Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and the Pacific and is now the chairman of the Asia Group as well as a member of the US Council on Foreign Relations. He joins us now from Washington. Kurt Campbell, a warm welcome back to Lateline.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you, Emma. Thank you.
Now, before we talk specifically about the tensions on the South China Seas, I wanted to ask you about Japan, where Prime Minister Abe has signed a free trade agreement. The deal involves halving tariffs over 15 to 18 years on Australian beef, and Japanese cars and electrical goods will be cheaper here in Australia. The United States still hasn't managed to sign a trade deal with Japan. What's been the hold-up?
Yeah. Well, can I first say you've got to give credit where credit is due. This is a massive victory for the Prime Minister Abbott. Countries, industrialized countries in Europe and the United States and elsewhere have been trying to get this kind of agreement from Japan for 30 years. This is a major breakthrough, and I believe it will open the door for the next phase of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in which the United States is dealing directly with Japan. But what Prime Minister Abbott and his team have accomplished in this recent visit is not only to take the Japan-Australian relationship really to the next level, not just in trade, but in diplomacy and security, but it also underscores that there are other key players in Asia besides China. And so I'm very impressed by this. I think most of the region will take notice, and kudos to the Prime Minister and his team.
Australia has effectively given up on manufacturing cars. Do you think not having a car industry to protect would have made the trade deal with Japan that much easier for Australia to negotiate?
Well, look, it is the case that one of the strong critics or opponents, even in some circumstances, of the next steps in trade diplomacy between the United States and Japan is indeed the car industry, because they're fearful that despite agreements, the structural impediments of the Japanese system and the consumer market make it almost impossible for foreign vehicles to be successful. Now, the Japanese turn around and report that some of the largest increases in at least per capita sales in Japan have come from European models. So I do think it probably helps not having a car industry to protect or to promote, but ultimately it's still a very substantial deal, particularly on the beef side. And that is also an area where Japanese friends have been very difficult over the years.
Well, Australia has managed to see beef tariffs cut from 38.5% to around 19% within 18 years. Our farmers, of course, wanted to see zero tariffs. What will America be happy with for its beef and sugar exports as far as the tariffs go?
Well, look, I'm not part of the negotiations. I'm told they're very intense. But if you actually sit and dissect the actual agreement, there's substantial easing in the first couple of years. It phases out ultimately over a longer period of time. But there is some front loading here that will be very substantial for Australian beef exporters. I can tell you that the United States has our own ranchers and groups involved with meat exports are looking at this agreement with substantial envy and are this morning calling U.S. Trade Representative offices right next door to the White House saying, take notice of this and let's see if we can do better.
Now, Tony Abbott has also become the first foreign leader to attend a meeting of Japan's National Security Council. How do you think that's likely to be viewed in China?
Well, look, I think any time a country deals with Japan beyond economic issues in the national security space, it tends to ruffle feathers in China. But I think China needs to understand and appreciate that ultimately Japan is a peace-loving nation. It has not fired a shot in anger in over 70 years. They are not on the rampage in Asia. They are simply trying to respond to a rapidly changing security set of dynamics, not only in Northeast Asia, but across the region as a whole. And I think it's appropriate that allies and friends are meeting to discuss the many challenges that we confront together. Some of these, Emma, are not involving China. It's the national security implications of piracy, how to work together in recovering lost airliners, a whole host of things that frankly unite Asia rather than divide. But still, I think China is likely to be critical in the coming days. Ultimately, however, being able to show that you're strong and independent and that you chart your own course, I think Chinese friends take notice of that, and I think it gives them a sense that this is a country that has to be dealt with respect. And that's what I expect that China will show to Australia.
And for all the talk of conflict on the high seas, both in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, we see what our own Prime Minister has categorised as quite unique in bringing together all these countries in the search for the missing airline.
Yeah, look, I don't mean to pile on here in terms of success. And, you know, there's few countries that, you know, sort of take credit more easily than Australia. But if you look at just the last couple of weeks in Asia, right, first of all, a very substantial and very successful visit by the Prime Minister up to Japan. And again, almost unique in modern history. Dial back 2 weeks ago to what was going on in the tragedy of the disappeared Malaysian airliner. Comments coming out of Malaysia that were contradictory, no sense of a spokesman who really could communicate both expertise and calm, daily recriminations from Beijing that were riling and frankly undermining the competence of Malaysia, deep uncertainty what to expect next. The dynamic shifts to Australia. Angus becomes deeply involved and becomes the spokesperson for the search. His everyday calm, his expertise is deeply appreciated, and there is a sense among all the nations involved that we're now working together to solve a substantial problem. Ultimately, I don't think that would have happened without Australian leadership. So again, very successful, substantial effort, both in terms of this kind of crisis diplomacy and also the long-term vision of a larger Australia working in East Asia and the Pacific.
And you were, of course, referring to their Angus Houston
yeah, I'm sorry.
from here in Australia. That's okay.
I should be Air Marshal Houston, I'm sorry.
Now, back to the South China Sea and China's increasingly aggressive behaviour there. Is this about oil and gas and fishing, or is there something else that Beijing is trying to achieve there?
You know, Emma, I think it goes deeper than that. I really do. You know, you started the segment by saying these vast resources. In truth, we really, in certain small areas, there are resources, but we ultimately really don't know what lies beneath the South China Sea. What really animates sort of the drive among many nations, and probably China at the top of the list, for trying to secure their alleged maritime holdings, is this sort of identification with these areas and nationalism. And what I have seen in the diplomacy behind the scenes on both the East Sea and the South China Sea are diplomats that are white-knuckled. They have no give whatsoever, and that they're being driven by nationalist impulses. What the United States, what Australia, what ASEAN has done with China over a period of years is make clear that, look, we want to work with you diplomatically. We want to understand what we believe to be your interpretation of your claims. We want them to be consistent with the law of the sea. We want a commitment that issues associated with where there are disputes will be managed peacefully. We see a lot of dynamic movement on the part of new Chinese President Xi Jinping on the economic side. And I think we are encouraged by signs of reform in terms of domestic politics. I will say one of the few areas that there is anxiety as we're seeing a much tougher line on these territorial disputes. And I think, as the earlier speaker indicated, it is likely that China's actions will galvanize some resistance and anxiety in ASEAN, and it will be a reminder to the United States that our role has been important, but it will continue to be in the Asia-Pacific in the period ahead.
Well, the US Navy Captain James Fennell, who is the top intelligence officer in the Pacific Fleet, has said, and I quote, "The Chinese Navy is focused on war at sea and sinking an opposing fleet, and that the Chinese paramilitary fleet has no other mission but to harass other nations into submitting to China's expansive claims." That's a profoundly disturbing analysis for all Southeast Asian nations, including Australia.
Well, look, there is the issues that militaries train for quietly and prepare for, and then there is the larger diplomacy that takes place. I have no doubt that in parts of the Chinese military, there are war games that are hostile towards American and other forces. But I also believe that China is committed, at least for the period going forward, to play a responsible role and to work with the United States and other Asian countries to preserve peace and stability. It's going
I'm
to be
sorry
that
to interrupt
balance.
you, Kurt Campbell, sorry, because we are running out of time, but I just want to pick up on your point there, because the Philippines took China to the International Court at The Hague, and China simply refused to participate. So it doesn't appear that China is respecting international law.
Well, I would say on these particular issues, I would agree that we are seeing stubbornness and, frankly, a difficulty finding common ground with China. But it is also the case behind the scenes, Emma, that China is working with other nations on certain issues in which it might be possible, for instance, to do oil exploration in a situation where neither country has to claim sovereignty. Ultimately, this is going to be a long process in which the most important thing is for the United States and other countries to be vigilant in terms of what we expect in terms of behavior in the South China Sea.
Political scientist and founder of the Eurasia Group, Dr. Ian Bremmer, says the administration hasn't publicly focused on the pivot to Asia since John Kerry became Secretary of State because it's not his background or focus. Dr. Bremmer reckons the key figures who cared about this region, which he names as Timothy Geithner, Hillary Clinton and one Kurt Campbell, are gone. And that's why the focus has moved away from the pivot. What do you say to Ian Bremmer?
Look, I respect Ian, and I'm not going to get into the personality game here, but I will tell you this, Emma. The policy of the U.S. government really begins at the top. It begins with the commitment of the president. President Obama is going on a major visit to Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and the Philippines. The first visit of a U.S. president to Malaysia since 1967. That in itself is almost condemnatory about American engagement, but I'm pleased about this visit. And he has a chance, after a very tough year in 2013 in Asia, to really underscore that our commitment to Asia is strong and it will grow over time. I have full confidence that that's going to be the case going forward. And do not underestimate Secretary Kerry. I think now that we see that some of the challenges in the Middle East may be difficult to overcome, I think he will come to recognize very clearly that the advantages and the potential for American engagement in Asia is large.
Kurt Campbell, it's always a great pleasure to share your insights. We're out of time.
Thank you,
Emma. So much.
Great to be with you. Best to you.